All right, I have this booted up now, and this should still work because we never removed the example endpoint. So we'll see we're still getting this back, but we will remove it at some point because we won't need it. But yeah, let's work on the client side of this. So I have the main.dart open within the Flutter part of the project. And first thing I want to do is, of course, disable that debug checked mode banner. We'll say false. And then we just don't have that little pesky thing in the corner there. And we're going to get rid of all of this stuff here. And we'll just put a scaffold here. And now we should just have sort of this empty blank ready to go project. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go here. Now I'm going to preface this with a couple things. First of all, I really want to keep the focus on this project, on this tutorial, related to Serverpod, and not things like Riverpod and state management and architecting things really nicely. So I'm going to be using things like stateful widgets for this, just because then you don't have to learn anything, outside of the default Flutter stuff, other than Serverpod, of course. However, I have been working on another Serverpod video that's a little more larger scale, where I am using Riverpod and better architecture and stuff like that. So stay tuned for that one at some point, because the way I'm doing it here is really just to illustrate how to work with Serverpod and not necessarily like the best practices for Flutter. That being said, we are going to create a stateless widget. We're going to call it game. And I'm going to actually immediately convert this to a stateful widget. So here we go. We have our game. And we're going to go over here, and we're just going to go game. And we should be fine. So I'll save both those files. And this just returns a placeholder. So we should just see this placeholder here now. Actually, sorry. I'm going to keep this as a scaffold and make the body game, just so it's actually in a scaffold and we have material and all that stuff. So now it's a slightly prettier version of what I just showed. Okay, so within our stateful widget now, there's a few things we're going to want to track. First of all, the player itself. And this will be null because if once you kind of boot it up, we won't necessarily have the player. So we're going to create that. We're also going to have an instance of the game state. Similarly, can be null. And we want to get our init state function going. So in here, we'll run the super.init state, and then we are going to then immediately listen to updates, which is a function we're going to make. So we'll just kind of put it there. Actually, put it before the build. I like build being at the end. And then what we need to do is actually have what's called our connection handler. And this is specifically for listening and broadcasting socket events. So we're going to make this part of our class here. It's going to be final, but it's going to be late. And essentially right in our init state, we're going to instantiate this. So we can go connection handler equals, we'll import streaming connection handler. So this comes from Serverpod client right there. And we need to pass in our client here, and we can just import that because remember in our main.dart, just in the example, there's a client right there. So we're going to just pass that one in, and we're going to have a listener. And the listener just is listening to when connection state changes. So, at first you won't have a connection state. You might have one slightly after. And in here, we're not going to do anything, but we are just going to run this at state because if there is a connection state change, we might want to sort of like rebuild. And then after we have that instantiated, we can go connection handler.connect. And this will actually just connect to the server, which essentially will call, if we go back here, it's essentially going to call this streamed open function on our server when we actually connect to it. Okay, so we have that. Now in our listen to updates, what we can do here is we can actually await, and we do have to make this async for that to work. So we go await, and then we can actually await in a for loop all of our updates that come from the server. So we can go client.trivia, because that's the name of the endpoint, .stream. So in here, we're going to get different updates, and these will be serializable entities because an update can be anything. It can be the server saying a new player's joined, or here's a new question, or here's a reaction or a comment or something from another player. And what we want to do though is actually check things like if the update is an instance of game state, because game state is just a subclass of serializable entity, which this is. And when you have these wrapped in here, your IDE is smart enough to now treat this as a game state instead of just a generic serializable entity. So we can actually do things like set state and take our game state and actually make it equal to that update, because this is a game state at this point. What we can also do is if the player is not null right now. So if we don't have, if we already instantiated our player, we can actually update our player. So we can take the update. Remember, our game state has a attribute called players, and get the first where. And we'll just call this P. And we want to check where P.identifier is equal to our player, this one right here, or this one right here, .identifier. And the reason we want to do this is when the game state changes, we want to update our own player because maybe the scores changed, or like maybe if our server had a way to rename a player, we want to make sure that our instance of like our local player is in sync. So whenever the game state changes, we're just going to do a set state here. There's other things we could check for too, but this is all we're going to worry about for now. So we'll just have a nice to-do there. Okay, now in our build function, we'll get rid of this. And the first thing I want to check is if our player is equal to null, then really we haven't joined yet. And we want to give some UI to actually like put a name in. So I'm going to, rather than type this whole thing out, because it really is just basic Flutter stuff, and I'll go over the parts that is Serverpod. But essentially, what we're doing is we're just going to have a constrained box. It's going to have a text form field in it to type in your name, and then I'll talk about this a bit more when we get there. But we need this name controller still. So we're just going to have a name controller on this class, and I'll put it right here. So it'll just be called name controller. It's just a text editing controller. So in here, and then there'll be a button under it that essentially says join game. And when you click it, what we need to do is we are going to run our join function. So it's really cool because I have my client and I can go in the endpoint trivia, and it's actually giving me, all the things we made: get game state, join, et cetera, et cetera. And here, obviously, we would pass in our name controller.text as a name. Now, of course, in a real app, you'd want to do some validation on this, make sure it's probably not empty, make sure it's not a swear word, something like that. So we await that, and that'll give us back a player, right? And then we're also going to ask for the game state at this time too. And we can just run that get game state function, which over here, over here, get game state is just going to return the server's current game state. And we'll just set both of those things in state and we'll be good. Now let's, after this, for now, I'm just going to return a size box because we are getting an error because this widget, we have to return a widget from here at some point. And let's actually just save that. And our server's running, so we should be fine. And I'm just going to now type in, Tyler, join game. And you'll see it's blank now. And that's because we have this size box. But just to make sure stuff's working, let's actually return text here that maybe we'll take the player.name. Now this could, we know this isn't null because we're already checking for that and exiting out. So I can actually just make this an exclamation mark. And we should see my name right there. And if I rebuild, because we're not doing anything to like persist the data, I'm going to essentially be a new person, and I can put my name as Bobby, join the game, and we'll have Bobby there, which is fine. Okay, next up. So after we've checked if there's no player, let's check if the game state is null. It could be because chances are it won't be because we've gotten both right here, but in case something weird's happening server side, let's just have some sort of like placeholder loading thing. And again, I'm just gonna paste this in because it's just a centered progress loader with something that says waiting for next question. There we go. So if the game state's null, we would see this. Now, in our case, we shouldn't because we already set the game state, but I just want to handle it just to be safe. Okay, so now what I'll do down here is we're just going to make a variable called Q, and we're going to take the game state dot question, and I can safely do this because we know it's not null. And we'll make another thing called players. So not player, but players, and this is going to be game state dot players. All right. So now we actually want to kind of return a place that will show the question and give you the places to do the answers. So we'll start with a column, and we'll make its cross-axis alignment stretch just to make everything kind of fill the screen. However, we will wrap this in some padding so it's not totally touching the screen. And here we'll have some children. So the first thing I think it would be cool to have is actually show many players are in the game. So we'll start by having just a row here, and we'll put its children, and we'll have some text, and we can just go total players. And here we'll just take our players dot length right here, which is this value right here. So we'll have that in this row. The other thing I want in the row is something to tell the user their score. So we can actually do here, and we can do player dot score. It's not players, but player. And we will just go main axis alignment dot space between, just so they go on each side. So let's see if this even looks. So we have 2 players in the game, and that makes sense because I joined as Tyler, and then I joined as Bob or Bobby or something, and there's my score of 0. Now we can make this total players thing a little more fun. First of all, let's wrap it in an inkwell. And let's actually just add some decoration here to make it look like a link. This could, of course, just be a button. You can do it however you want. Text style. I'm just going to make it underlined. And let's add a comma there. So now it kind of looks like something you can click. And of course, we want to allow them to click it. And here we're just going to do a show modal bottom sheet of all the players. And similarly, I'm just going to paste this in because it's just basic Flutter stuff. We're just showing modal bottom sheet, safe area, and then we're doing a list view.builder, taking all the players and looping through them, and just a card that has their name and their score. So now I can click this, and we'll actually see all the players and their scores, which is super fun. Okay, so that kind of handles the top. Now we want to have something after this row, and let us put it in. So we can actually do a text of the Q.question. So the actual question of the question, because remember, a question has answers and an ID and all this. This is the actual body of the question. And let's just make it a little bit prettier here. We'll just do a theme of context for headline medium, and then center the text. And oh, I put that in the wrong spot. That makes sense. I meant to put it at the question. So now we'll have this here. Earth is located in which galaxy? Cool. So we're getting questions back. This is our first thing. Now let's see if our hey, it is working. So you saw that we don't have a counter or anything now, but it went from one question to another because the server is just saying here's a new question. Basically, just to walk through what was happening there, we have our trivia game. And essentially what happens is after that, every time that timer runs, it runs this next question, which gets the next question, and then it posts this message. And because we're connected to it, and because we are listening for changes way up here, we're listening for game state changes, the game state is being updated when that happens. So it's just changing. Now you notice something kind of funny here. We're getting these funky characters, and that's just because the API we're using is sort of sanitizing things to HTML entities. So we can fix that with a simple package. So we're going to just install this on the Flutter side. In theory, you could do this on the server side and normalize it there and send it back, but we'll just do it on the Flutter side. And it's called HTML_unescape. And we'll just import that somewhere up here. And what we'll do is actually wrap our question, if I can find it, way down here. And I believe it's unescape, HTML unescape dot, I forget the term here, but it's convert. So then we do convert, and we just pass in that question. And let's just see if I'll wait for one to show up that has that issue, so that we can actually see the fix. So there's one right there. So I'll just save this now, and we'll actually see it changed it back to normal quotes. Cool. So that's just a nice, quality of life thing. We don't want to show our users weird things that they won't understand. Obviously, if this was an HTML app, those things the browser would automatically do that, convert it for you. So it's normally fine. But for our uses, we need to convert it. Okay. Then after the questions, let's just after the question, let's add a size box. And then in our column, we're just going to take our q.answers and spread them. I'm going to convert them to a map, and there's a good reason for this. We're going to take the entries and we're going to map through these. The reason I want to convert to a map is this will allow us to both have the index that we're looping through and the value itself, rather than just the values. And the reason we want the index is because we need that to know what answer someone's selecting. So in here, I'll just return nothing for a second. Let's just make something called answer. And that's going to be equal to entry.value. So you'll see this is actually just a string because the answers are all strings. But we'll actually have something called index, and that's going to be entry.key. And this will be an integer. Start at 0, loop every time. So 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, then in here, let us return a card. And its child will simply just be text. And here we'll use that HTML unescape again, because the answers also could potentially have those characters in it. And we're going to take the answer and put it here. And similarly, let's center align it and also use headline small for this. So now we should actually see some, cool answers here. Yay. Let's also wrap this in a bit of padding just to kind of make it look a bit nicer there. Okay. Now, obviously, these need to be clickable. So we're going to wrap our card in an inkwell. And we'll do an on tap here. And in our on tap event, which we'll actually make asynchronous, we're going to essentially tell the server, hey, here's our answer. So we will just go await client.trivia.submit answer. And here we have to pass in our player identifier. So we're going to use our player.identifier. We're going to pass in the question ID, and this is why we needed the index here. Sorry, no, that's for the answer. For question ID, we would use q.id. For answer, this is where we need to use that index, because we want to either be passing 0, 1, 2, or 3. So that's why we did the as map and entries, so we can easily get that. Okay, now this actually returns something to us, which is nice. So it returns a bool. So we can actually see here, it will return either true or false, depending on if it's correct or not. And that's why I'm calling this correct. And we can basically go, if correct, we can do something. If not, we do something else. So if correct, let's just do a scaffold messenger, show snack bar like that. Otherwise, we'll just show, incorrect. Now, I'm not doing anything. I'm not modifying the player's score, because we are going to completely rely on the servers as the truth source of truth for that. But all that is good. Now I'm getting this little warning here, and it's because we are trying to access context after an await in something asynchronous. So if we wrap this whole thing in context.mounted, we can get rid of that error. Because there's, slightly a chance that, not in this app really, but in some cases, you could get this, and while it's going, maybe you leave the screen and then it tries to do this and context isn't mounted, and the app would crash or at least show some kind of error. So we'll just wrap it in this, and that way we don't have that warning anymore. Okay, so let's try this out and see if it works. Okay, what year was Apple founded in? I'm going to guess, okay, it's too slow. We're going to add a timer soon. I have no idea, but I'm going to click this, and I got the right one, correct. And I see my score is still 0, so, there it is. It's 1 now. I guess when I went to the next question, we'll look into getting that to update quicker. But yeah, we're able to answer, and I'm going to answer, incorrect here possibly. But check this out. I can actually, click many times. So that's kind of a problem because I don't want to, answer the same thing. Like I just got a whole bunch of points because I did that. So let's handle that. And this is something you'll also want to probably handle server side. I'm not going to worry about that for this tutorial, but in order to track this, let's have another variable up here, and we'll just call it. It'll be a list of integers called questions answered. And now what we can do in our when we're answering a question is, first of all, we'll just take our, we'll do a set state of our questions answered is going to be equal to the current questions answered, and we will pass in q.id. And before any of this, we'll just do a sort of a check on this. If question answered.contains q.id, we'll return out. We won't allow them to do it. Now, the problem is this will still allow me to, if I click here, I'll still kind of feel like I'm clicking. Now, it's not actually getting past this because we're returning out, but it might be nice to give user a bit more feedback. So one thing we can do is actually move this logic to here. So we can make the on attempt. We can check this first. So if it already contains that, let's just pass null here, meaning don't run the function. And that actually will at least make it so it's no longer has that sort of like hover effect. So you'll see I'm just can't actually do anything there. So if it contains that, we do that. Otherwise, we run this. And then we can also wrap this in a opacity widget. And we can make the opacity equal to, depending on that value, if it's in there, maybe it's like 0.4, otherwise it's 1. So you'll kind of have this like, oh, it's already, taken out. So let's see if we can make this. See, I mass tapped so many times. You know what? We're going to rebuild. Because one thing that's annoying about the scaffold thing, it's not really a toast. They all get queued up behind each other. Let's do Tyler 2, join game. So you'll see as soon as I click one of these, it now gets blurred out. There's a problem there, though. So something interesting is happening here. Basically, as soon as I answer one question, it thinks I've answered them all. And a little bit of thought made me realize maybe we, maybe all the IDs are the same. And closer investigation here, we have this ID equaling 0. We loop through, we set the ID. And the intention here was within our loop, we would actually go ID++. And that's a problem. So for this, we actually have to restart our server. Anytime you're making server-side changes, you do have to, at the very least, restart it. You may have to run the generator again if you're changing the shape of any of your endpoints or your models. But at the very least, you have to definitely restart so it can be running the newer code. We can also get rid of this for our next restart. So, and then I'll restart Flutter just to kind of go from scratch. And you'll notice now there will only be one player because when we restarted the server, everything was wiped. It's only persisted in memory while it's running. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so now if I click something, largest, okay, let's do skin. So I can't click any of these. Everything's good. And in theory now, when we get to the next question in a few seconds, they should be, yeah, here we go. So now I can click this and I got it wrong. Okay, that's too bad. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Let us do a couple more quality of life things here. So I think what we want to do is also have a countdown so that you know how much time you have to answer the question and really put the pressure on. So right now we have this list here. So before our column closes, let's just add a sized box with a height of maybe 8 and make sure we have that comma there. And here we're going to put like sort of like a countdown. Now I'm going to make this a separate widget. And the reason for that is we want this to kind of have its own state. So it will be a stateful widget. We'll just call it counter. And here we're going to ultimately return some text. And let's just give it some style. So I'll just do to do, or let's just put like 10 and give it a style. And we can't have a const here. And let's just make sure that it looks how we would want it. Cool. And then let's also just center this. I think I can just wrap it in a center. Let me see. Yeah, there we go. So we have this now. So what we want to do, though, is actually be able to pass something in here. We're going to pass in that Unix timestamp of when the round ends. So we'll just call it round ends, and we will require this. And within our state, we'll have something that's going to be an integer, and it's going to be seconds remaining. I'm making it late because I don't want to deal with null, and we're going to set it right away. We're also going to have a timer, and we'll have to import async for that. Okay, so in our init state, we're going to first of all call a function that I'm going to make in a moment, just called update value. And we want to instantiate our timer, and it's going to be equal to timer.periodic. And I'm going to make it a duration. We could probably get away with updating it every second, but let's actually just update it every, 300 milliseconds, just so that it's a little more accurate. And within this function, we'll also call the update value, which again doesn't exist yet. So let's make it. And I'm just going to put this above the build. Okay, so what we need to do is calculate how much time is left. So we'll call this final round ends, and this is going to be a date time object right now. So I'll just call it round ends date time. And we're basically going to take the date time, and we can use that instead of 2 milliseconds with epoch, we can actually do from milliseconds since epoch. And we'll take the widget.round ends, but we have to multiply it by 1,000 because this is actually in like a seconds since 1970, whereas this is milliseconds from 1970. Oh, and I just made an error that might have been hard to find. I put microseconds, not milli. So there we go. We'd have to multiply by 1,000,000 if we wanted to do that. So that'll give us a date time of actually when it ends. And then all we have to do is in here, we'll set state, and we'll do seconds remaining is going to be equal to, and we'll take the round ends date time, and we'll get the difference between that and now, datetime.now, and convert it to seconds. So that will be a value. And then just down here, all we need to do is really just put a reference to that, seconds remaining. And let's save that. We do have one error here, and it's because we have to pass in something here. So we need to pass in round ends, and we can just get that by going into our game state.round ends. And we know it's not null, so we can safely do that. Okay. And let's just do a rebuild for this. And we'll join Bobby. And we'll see we actually have this countdown happening now. So I kind of joined, partway in, in a bit of a rush. But then we, see the next one happening, 8, 7, 6. Yeah, I don't know the answer. I'm wrong. But yeah, we got this all working here, and we're able to play this game. And it's cool because I can play this with multiple people, right? So for instance, let's go here and let's go Flutter run -d Chrome, and I'll just boot up Chrome. So I have my Chrome browser now, and we'll have this here, and I can actually join. I'll just call this guy Chromie. We'll join the game, and we'll actually see, look, 3 players here, and you can see Chromie. And in theory, I have no idea what the answer is. Let's go with Belgium. Oh, I was right. And I'll do Belgium over here too, just to get points. And we should be able to see that the scores are updated, right? Everyone has 1 point. That's great. Okay, so let's do one other thing, because there's one topic we haven't really talked about, and because right now we have the client always talking to the server, like sending an event to the server through just a standard API call, and sometimes the server is responding through the API call, and sometimes it's also broadcasting stuff to the client. The one thing we're missing is how can the client actually just broadcast an event to the server through a socket. So let's make that happen in the next chapter.